Good morning. A warm welcome to the humanist community in Silicon Valley Sunday Forum. We hope you enjoy today's presentation. Humanism is a secular, reality-based philosophy of life, and we believe in using science and reason to acquire knowledge and apply that knowledge to the greater good. We hope you can donate to the humanist community on our website, www.humanists.org. This morning's talk is by Dr. George Erickson. He is a longtime supporter of nuclear energy, and he has written a number of scientific books on the subject. And I will let him introduce himself in more detail. Okay, George, we're ready for you to share your screen.
Thank you. You asked about introducing myself. I am 90 years old. I'm a retired dentist. I've always been a science person. And I have 5 books, one a bestseller. The most recent one you'll have information on at the end of this program. This presentation has won really significant praise among the climate change professionals, and I'm pleased to share it with you today. And I hope that Ray will make it available on the website so that people can download it. I joined the Thorium Energy Alliance not long ago, maybe 15 years ago. And I have to credit them with everything in here and within the book that is mentioned at the end. We are in deep trouble with climate change, and most people don't realize it. But because nuclear power is our single most effective tool for cutting back on carbon, we should be doing that. 20,000 years ago, next image 2, when there were just 300 million people, Seneca warned us, the Roman senator, a bull is content with a meadow, and a forest is enough for 100 elephants. But the little body of a man devours more than all living things. Next. It's easy to talk about the other people, but look at Mexico City. Think about the garbage. But now let's look closer to home. Next image. There's Manhattan. Look at the garbage barges. 100,000 tons per day into the ocean. Next. Climate change is far more serious than most people realize. This is Nebraska. This isn't Louisiana or the Texas coast. This is Nebraska 2019. And earlier last year, this flood in Pakistan killed 1,220 million homeless. And that count was not final when I made this image. Next, please. We've all seen these images about Lake Mead being at so low. Lake Powell, which feeds Lake Mead, is down 75%. And Lake Mead is also down 75%. And yet no one has suggested dimming the lights in Las Vegas, although they are getting serious about it because of the water constraints out west. Next image. By 2025, just think that is 3 years, Cairo, population 20 million, will be short of water. Imagine what that will do. And by 2050, the 4 billion people who need water that comes from mountain runoff will be desperate. That's soon. And we have 8 billion people on this planet now, about half of which you could probably sustain if we divided all the assets equally. People who don't believe in climate change, they're the anti-vaxxers of the climate change movement, need to look at a chart like this. Unfortunately, this is from NOAA. Unfortunately, they don't bother or they don't care. I want to pause for a moment because I forgot something in the introduction. I want to comment on the young lady who gave a previous program on solar panels, basically how they worked. There was nothing wrong at all with her presentation, her program, her data. It was fine, but it should have been given, and maybe was, to a college level physics class. Instead, and there was no, in my view, bottom line. You got a bunch of information, and if you're given information, you do with it what you want. Most people will take that information and say, oh, okay, solar must be a good thing. Unfortunately, she should be, if in the colleges or wherever she works, she should be countering that with the program. These are the downsides of solar power. Maybe she doesn't know them, but she should. Now back to business here. I'll go to the next image, which is the Arctic image of the Arctic ice pack. On the left is March 2000, 22 years ago. On the right is March 2020. And this is in the same month. But look how drastically the ice pack has shrunk. By another 10 years, we will probably not have ice at all in March. And the thing is, we have to understand that ice reflects heat, but water absorbs it. And water not only holds less oxygen.
One slide behind.
The oceans are the source. The oceans are, there's somebody.
Yeah, no.
There's someone voice cutting in.
We'll be quiet.
Going back to the images, the oceans provide 20% of our oxygen, 50% of our ocean, and 20% of our protein. So we are in great difficulty. Next image is a polar bear. I have flown in the Arctic for 38 summers, and I am intimately knowledgeable with polar bears, and I highly regard them. Without ice, polar bears and birthing seals will be driven ashore. This is already happening, becoming prey for foxes, wolves, and grizzlies. And even a healthy bear is no match for a grizzly. Spread open the jaws of both and you will see why. Next image. We don't care, unfortunately, about these things. We care about jobs and we care about money. California, I believe you folks are pretty close to California unless things have been shifted by some earthquake that I haven't heard of. The Golden State. As you know, organisms like bark beetles, once held in check by cold winters, are surviving. UN Secretary General Guterres says we are on the road to climate hell. This is why it's not only time to get serious, it's overdue. Worldwide, we create 85% of our electricity and heat for buildings and industry by burning carbon. And that's approximate. I think it's closer to 80. So why are we expanding carbon-dependent, inefficient wind and solar farms instead of expanding carbon-free, highly efficient nuclear power? I'll tell you. Next image, please. First, we'll go up to Canada's tar sands. That's in Alberta, where one of North America's worst greenhouse gas generators exists. By the way, you should understand that getting gas out of tar sands, meaning that you mine the sands, you cart it to a refinery where it has to be heated, of course, by burning carbon to boil off the water. Then you have to refine it. This process takes 5% more energy than just drilling a well and getting it, but we don't care as long as we get the product. Since the industrial age began, we have created 2 trillion tons of carbon dioxide, and we are adding 50 billion tons per year. 1/3 of that has already dissolved in our oceans, and that makes them increasingly hostile to the life that provides 20% of our protein and 50% of our oxygen. Because as the oceans acidify, when you add carbon dioxide, things like phytoplankton and all the shell animals and the kelp are handicapped and can die. And this has begun. And death to the oceans is going to be extremely serious to the human race. Russia, China, Korea, Turkey. Next slide, I'm showing a slide of Diablo Canyon. Russia, China, Korea, Turkey, India, and 15 other nations are expanding to contradict nuclear power. But led by BP, Exxon, and willfully ignorant green organizations, we have closed 4 nuclear plants in the United States while fighting to keep this one open. I will give you one example. I'll give you 2. We closed the Vermont nuclear plant, Vermont Yankee, because it was leaking a tiny amount of tritium. The amount of tritium is already present in nature. The amount leaking was infinitesimal and about 20% of what Canada allows. But we have some absolutely nutty restrictions on US nuclear power. In California, the San Onofre plant was closed, pressured by people who got to the legislatures, and they closed it because they preferred to spend 4 times as much money as repairing defective equipment that we bought from Japan. We could have fixed that plant for 1/4 the money that they used to close it. All because of this anti-nuclear hysteria that is supported by the carbon companies very under sub rosa and by green organizations that refuse to watch presentations on the safety of nuclear power. Next image should be solar panels on a house. Yes, I do mean willfully ignorant. The Sierra Club and its clones that have taken money from oil companies refuse to watch presentations on nuclear power and the defects of wind and solar, which will be revealed soon. Here's another example of the uphill battle we change. Bill McKibben, whose book, The End of Nature, which I recommend, turned me on to climate change, now privately supports nuclear power, but he will not go public. When asked why not by a reporter, he told William Tucker that if he did, he'd lose half of his 350.org members if he endorsed nuclear power. Once again, money has trumped the environment. This is tragic. I urge you to watch Michael Moore's Planet of the Humans. It is free on the web. The link to it is in the book, my book, unintended consequences, which you will see at the end of this program. And I'm sure Ray will share it with anyone. As a matter of fact, I hope he mails it to everyone. Next image. If you're really concerned about ecology and climate change and the environment, wouldn't you care about how much land it takes to generate the same amount of electricity? Well, here's an example. The power plant on the left needs that amount of space to generate an amount of power equal to what wind and solar are generating. Far less, by factors of hundreds, than wind and solar. Wind and solar displace every species wherever they are erected. Next image. The coal companies know this, and the miners know this. This is a message in the papers from Australian coal miners. Nuclear power will kill the coal industry. This fear began in the 1920s with a man called Hermann Muller, and we're going to examine that fear. In 1926, Hermann Muller, the short fellow, x-rayed fruit flies with a huge dose that was equal to 1,000 mammograms in 3.5 minutes. That is an intense dose in a very short time, which is horrible. And he concluded without evidence that all radiation is harmful down to 0, and it is cumulative. And we know that is wrong now. But at that time, we didn't understand that we had built-in natural repair mechanisms for DNA repair for damage. He got to be the guru. He lied when he said there is no doubt, because he praised his coworkers who disagreed with him. And he never tested it at low dosages. And he promised he would, but he didn't do it. So he knew there was doubt, but he said it anyway. He came on to be the respected figure. So his prediction became dogma. I'm now on the chart that says nuclear power is the safest energy source of all by the World Health Organization. And if you can't trust them, you can't trust anything. This original chart is from roughly 20 years ago, but the inserted material is more current. And you can see that nuclear is hugely safer than wind and solar and even hydro, which people would think is pretty safe. However, when you have a dam like at Jonestown or Johnstown in the United States fail, and you have 2,000 people die, your number goes up pretty fast. So again, if you care about safety, nuclear power is not only the best, it is by far the best for generating the same amount of electricity. And that's what matters. Next image, please. All methods of creating electricity are evaluated in 2 ways. One is how much is generated under ideal conditions. And the second is how much is created long-term, like over a year, because you can pick a wonderful, sunny, perfect day and call that your capacity, but you're not going to have that all the time. But that's what the industry represents. Nuclear power generates about 92% of its rated capacity. Wind and solar generate only 33, 1/3, and 1/5, respectively, with the rest of that implied capacity being generated primarily by power plants that burn carbon. Therefore, they are not really green, they are false green, because they are still, makes us still carbon dependent. And the proof is in the next image. These are the capacity factors. That's what I just talked about. And notice this is from the U.S. Energy Information Administration. It's not from the nuclear industry. The nuclear industry is perfectly capable of defending itself. It just doesn't get the press that wind and solar get. They rate, and this is roughly 9 years old, nuclear at 90.10. It's actually 92 currently. Going to the right, photovoltaic solar PV is rated 19. That is now a little better than 20. And wind is now 33. So that's confirmation from official sources of the information I just gave you in the previous image. Next, please. The green fix for intermittent wind and solar, instead of saying, hey, these things don't work very well, is to say, and we should use nuclear, is to build more of them, okay? That's gonna take more land. It's gonna take more resources. And when that isn't enough, they even say, well, we'll build more and we'll make batteries to store it, which totally ignores the carbon footprint of making all this stuff. Nuclear power doesn't need batteries. It doesn't need backup. It's 24/7. In addition, we have to start thinking about carbon footprints of every project, beginning with shovel in the ground, all the way to eventual recycling of the facility. And we don't do that. The wind and solar companies know these numbers, but they don't tell you. And that includes these carbon capture products that sound so good that we hear so much about. Okay, it'll be wonderful if these carbon capture projects capture more carbon than they created in building them, but you never see those numbers. And as you ask for them, you do not get them. You have to know how much does mining, which is carbon intensive, the material for these towers, for these blades, for the copper that connects them to the grid. And the same thing for solar. How does that compare with the carbon they're pulling out? And how long do they live? Nuclear power plants last about 60 years. These things last about 20. And then you've got to start over. It's a farce. And our legislators, unfortunately, think about jobs and money. They don't do science. If they have science consultants, these people don't know their work or they're not doing their job. Next image. This is the Tesla battery array in Australia. Think about this. It will store the equivalent, it'll be able to discharge 388,000 megawatts per hour. And that's for not a very long time. Look at this ball of thorium, a little bigger than a golf ball being held in someone's hand. Thorium, by the way, is an alternative and better fuel for reactors than uranium. The only reason we stuck with uranium is we began with it in the Admiral Rickover's submarines, and it worked well. And water cooling was great because it's a submarine. And so we just kept making them bigger and bigger and bigger. The first plant in Vermont for commercial use ran on thorium for a while, very successfully. But we liked what had worked so well, so we just stuck with the uranium. That was a mistake. We have enough, and by the way, when we decided, oh, we gotta cut back on carbon, we very careful, the industries and the Greens were very careful to define nuclear power out of the equation because it wasn't, open quote, not renewable, close quote. That is rubbish. We have enough uranium and thorium to last for at least 100,000 years And the human race is probably going to be gone, in my view, within 300. But that doesn't matter. You make a lot of money with these batteries that have huge environmental consequences, both in accessing the resources needed to make them, and they're inefficient, and when it comes time to recycle them because of the toxic elements they contain. Next image. There are a very few green groups that get this. This is one of them, a Vermont group, and the ads they have been running. And they point out the windmill. When this thing isn't turning, this here is burning, and they're pointing at an oil well. They are reinforcing my point that because of their inefficiency and other defects, they are in effect carbon dependent. Next image shows BP, which supports wind and solar. They run ads like the lower part. Wind and turbines are flying high, but how do you keep the lights on when the wind stops blowing? We see a simple answer: clean burning natural gas. Of course they support that, because they lose on one end and they gain on the other. They don't tell you that natural gas is 90% methane and that their wells are leaking terrible amounts of methane. Methane is 80% worse than CO2 for decades in its youth. Eventually, as it degrades to water and carbon dioxide, it is 20% worse. So they tell you 20%, but in these coming decades that really matter, it's 80%, 80 times worse, pardon me. Let's switch slides, please. Look at this graph that shows the rate of methane accelerating in our atmosphere. The leakage alone in the US is equal to operating 70 million cars a year. And that chart ends about 4 years ago. So it's even worse now. Next image, please. This is a 2012 Boston area methane image. And down below from CNN is a previous statement. I remember this: 1 dead, 24 injured in 30 natural gas explosions, all leakage in 3 Boston area towns. Those are ground area measurements, not from above that could be maybe off a little. Those are measured at the site. And yet nobody talks about methane, or very few do. Oh, they blame feedlots. Well, before all those feedlots were there, we had millions of bison roaming the American plains. That's a diversion. The problem is not feedlots. That contributes to it now. The problem is our habits that are carbon dependent. Next image. Look at this image that includes Minneapolis, St. Paul, and I live north of Duluth, which is in the upper right-hand corner. The flaring, everywhere you drill one of these wells for oil, you get a certain amount of natural gas. And if your wells are widely spaced, as they are in the Bakken facility, it's cheaper for the companies to flare that methane, to burn it. In a way, it's a good thing they do, because they convert it to carbon dioxide, which is not as bad as the methane in it. But just look at that image and compare the size of it to Minneapolis and to Denver. And this is from the London Times, I believe, or a London paper, I forget which. Bakken flaring could power Chicago and Washington, D.C., and we're wasting it because we won't control the leakage or make use of it. We don't care about it if it doesn't pay. We'd also think that if you're an environmentalist, and a real one, you'd care about how much tonnage is required to build the same amount of generative capacity. Look at this. Solar requires 10 times more mining than nuclear for the materials to generate the same amount of electricity. And mining, it's almost all diesel, or some cases diesel electric, has a huge carbon footprint. Just compare nuclear at the bottom with 9 million and solar, the worst. I would have guessed that wind would have been worse, but it isn't. And then those things only last 20 years and you start over. Look at what we're doing. Our legislators, and I will include many of them as being willfully ignorant. They don't want to see presentations like this. I offer them and others offer them, and we don't get very far. And again, these are federal statistics. Look in the middle column. Nuclear power to generate the same amount of electricity gets $3 roughly per megawatt hour. And that's 2010. It's worse now. And that's federal. Many states also subsidize them. The solar column on the right, which is not to scale, it would go way off the top of the chart if it were, gets 775. So in effect, solar gets $250 for every dollar given to nuclear power. Next slide, please.
I'm not running the slides.
Oh. We're a slide behind. Huh? We're a slide behind.
Oh, really?
I just spoke about federal electric subsidies slide. It's a chart with subsidies on it. I'm sorry if I forgot to say advance. At any rate, you heard the material from it. We'll go ahead, one image. This is the cost of federal energy-related tax incentives in US millions, all nuclear, 3,400 some million. And look at oil and gas, which we shouldn't subsidize at all. And then look at wind, and then look at solar. And the projected subsidies are even worse. Next slide, please. This is a German image from Germany, from the German government. The line at the top is what is the plate rating for the excuse me a minute, I have to look at this. Okay, these are wind installations. And if you add it up to total capacity, that's what they kind of promise they give every year, because this is what we can do under ideal conditions. Well, you don't operate under ideal conditions. The dark blue spikes are what they actually delivered. But you pay for that plate rating. And therefore, all of this light blue has been made up by burning coal. Not only that, in Germany, they're so desperate, they are burning lignite. Next image, please. The dirty runt of the coal family. We have lignite mines in the United States. My cabin in northern Minnesota did use electricity I discovered that came from burning lignite. And when I inquired with the company about it, they said, oh, well, our lignite is beneficiated. And right away I spelled mirrors and cars. And I said, okay, what's beneficiated mean to you? I know what it means to me because I live where we mine iron. which is essential for a modern society. What they do is, because lignite has a fair amount of moisture in it, they heat it first to make it more efficient when you burn it. And how do they heat it? By burning carbon. It's a joke. The things the industry does to cover their tracks is terrible. Next image, please. We're looking at a windmill, and standing on the tip of that windmill are two Dutch engineers waiting to die. In the United States, and this image is probably about 10 years old, US windmills kill 1 million birds and bats per year. So you're an environmentalist, are you? You don't care if we do that? You don't care that these insects cause malaria, Eastern equine fever, and other diseases? So we go ahead and kill them. And you call yourself an environmentalist. These blades often only, and the gears often only last 10 years. They don't even last the 20 years of most of them. So we need to think about these things when we remember that most nuclear plants on average last 60 years. And we don't think about things like this. In addition, they're very subject to ice, freezing rain, and they can break a blade and throw them 4 city blocks. In addition, if they do start to ice, you have to hire helicopters to go out there and spray them with antifreeze. There are limitless defects to these projects, but you never hear from them except from people like me and my associates. Next image, please. Because these blades are not currently recyclable, they have to be sectioned and trucked off to remote areas like this Wyoming Blade Cemetery. Okay, think of the carbon footprint again of cutting, sectioning, and burying these blades, which is huge. And then I'll tell you one of the latest is, oh, well, we've come up with a solution for the blades. We'll take those, let's say that blade is 100 feet long, and that's probably not this piece of the blade is 100 feet long. That's probably not an exaggeration. We'll use that as a foundation to build a bridge over rivers. Well, again, we're making excuses to go ahead and do this. We should quit it rather than running around, transporting the blade, making a bridge over a stream. We are out of touch. Next image, please. The lady who gave you the previous program did a great job on how solar panels work. But unfortunately, she didn't take advantage of giving you the bottom line. And we always need to tell people, okay, here's the status, here's the information, here's what it causes, here's are the negatives and the positives. Millions went into billions, really, almost. Ivan Pabber broiler. By the way, these mirrors reflect light and heat against that tower, which contains a salty solution that gets super hot and makes steam, turns a generator, we get electricity. Way. Spain was big into these. They have closed every one. This Ivanpah has cost more than 1.6 billion. It has been closed due to gross inefficiency. Also the Tonopah one in Nevada. You'll hear people that are lovers of solar power give presentations on it. They don't give this. And when I interrupted one to point this out, they said, oh, I didn't know that. It's their business to know this. Another problem is, because those salt solutions have to be kept hot during the evening, night, and early morning hours, they have to be heated with natural gas or resistance electricity. So again, more carbon footprint, but people don't know that. Next image, please. This is a solar farm in Michigan. Now, if you're an environmentalist, what do you think about species displacement? You can bet that at least 100 different species lived on that land if you go right down to the insect level, not including the bacterial. And yet we don't care. In addition, we have to realize these panels can get 50 degrees hotter than their surroundings. So we've replaced part of a forest that not only absorbed temporarily carbon dioxide, but was perpetually liberating oxygen and through transpiration, cooling the planet. And now we've replaced it with these dark panels. You want proof? Go to a navy blue car or a black car that's been sitting in the sun for a couple hours and put your hand on it and let me see you keep it there. You won't. And we're supposed to care about global warming. We're superficial thinkers. We see what we want to see. Next image. This is a California southern solar farm. And look at the chart below. This one solar farm is liberating 1.2 million watts of heat per acre per day into the atmosphere. And we're supposed to care about global warming. That's per acre, not per square mile. And this solar farm, if I remember right, is less than a square mile, substantial, about 80%, I think. And the solar companies know that. They're making money on it. The radiation that comes down from the sun and from the cosmos falls on these panels. Those panels, and let's say it's a 1,000 kilowatt panel, 20% of that gets converted to electricity when they're working optimally. And 80% gets converted, almost 80% gets converted to heat, to which worsens global warming. We're not told that. And if you try to tell the solar fans that, they get angry. You get sworn at. You can criticize wind some because none of us own wind farms, but a lot of people have solar on their roofs and they don't want to know that they made a bad choice. We all do bad choices in ignorance, but the mark of maturity is to say, I didn't know that. I will see what I can do about it. The answer for homeowners is when your panels become less efficient, don't renew them. Use them till they are no longer anywhere near productive, and then get rid of them. If they were mine, I'd get rid of them now, but I can't convince people to do that. Next image, please. Puerto Rico, in I believe 2017 or 18, suffered huge hurricane damage, and again more recently. These panels have to be recycled as hazardous waste. They don't tell you that, and the cost runs us up to $30 a panel. In addition, the inverter for converting this DC to AC has to be replaced periodically, often more than one time during their lifetime. In addition, solar panels degrade at a rate of up to 1% per year. So you're never going to get as much as you get out of it the first year as each subsequent year. So their efficiency goes down, not up. And when you do recycle them, you leave behind toxic elements, permanently toxic elements, not radioactive elements that gradually become weaker. Next image, please, which is where these rare earths are mined in China. if you are equipped for it, look up Lake Baotou, China, the source of a lot of the rare earths, and also in South America that are required by wind and solar. Nuclear needs none of them. And the environmental controls are close to zero there. They're mining hundreds of miles of earth, concentrating it to get at the neodymium and other rare earths they need. And they're dumping all of the other toxic elements back in concentrated form into these huge lakes. Those lakes will dry up, turn to dust, and that dust will be distributed worldwide. Next image. Species extinctions, I think you probably realize, are already rising, and we are on that list. When we go, people suggest, well, okay, we won't burn carbon, we'll burn wood. We got lots of forests. Well, we do have lots of forests. But every year, worldwide, the area of the state of South Carolina is being denuded of forests. I mean, when we do, we take a multicultural forest that is home to hundreds, if not thousands, of species, if you go down to the microscopic level. And you replace, and then we say, oh, we will replace them. We replace them with a monoculture, usually some form of pine. In Minnesota, it's usually a Norway pine because it grows fast. That's home to almost nothing. There are no deciduous trees. There are no snags for the woodpeckers to nest in. There are no reason for beehives or bees that nest underground. And then these trees we pellet and send to Germany, which has another, cutting these, pelletizing them, shipping them to Germany, has a huge carbon footprint. And Germans, of course, are the ones that did that worst thing after Fukushima by shutting down most of their nuclear plants. And they are now learning a big lesson. Next slide, please. Even Angela Merkel has admitted that their program has been a failure. But do you believe that governments are eager to admit they've made a failure? Governments and industry structures are even harder to convince that they've made a mistake. Let me give you, this is the image of a penny with some nuclear power pellets. These are U-235 pellets. They're about the size of the last part of your little finger, your pointer finger. The U-235 in this one pellet has the potency of 1,700 gallons of gasoline. Imagine the volume of 1,700 gallons in that one little pellet. And that pellet only is roughly 4% U-235. The rest is U-238, which does not take part in the reaction in our US light water-cooled reactors. There are other reactors, for example, some of Canada's reactors that can consume the U-238, which is a great advantage, but we chose to just keep doing this, partly out of this anti-nuclear thing, because you want to change something even to improve it, means you're going to have to go through a whole bunch of paper and expense, and it might rock the boat. Next image, please. Before I get into this, I want to mention one more liability that nuclear suffers that is not applied to wind and solar. Companies that own nuclear power plants are required to set aside a percentage of their profits for eventually decommissioning of the plant, and that's okay. But they don't do that for wind or solar the last 20 years. They're not required to set aside any profit. Again, here's another advantage, a legislative advantage for wind and solar. Nuclear does not play on a fair playing field. The pellet on the left that you're seeing here, it says 5%, and it could be up to 5%, is the U-235 in current US nuclear reactors. And then to the right is a pellet at the end of its useful life, when the U-235 is pretty much used up, showing the fission products left. Some of the Canadian reactors, those they call CANDU, I like that, can use the U-238 and that plutonium waste for fuel. We were recycling that used fuel during the Carter administration until the middle of it. But the Cold War was on, and Carter made the bargain with Russia. Because including that recycled fuel, there is some plutonium that could be used for bombs, we will stop recycling if you will stop producing plutonium. And as a result of that came the Atoms for Peace program, where we were buying Russian plutonium and using it in our reactors to create electricity. But that program ended when we had to stop recycling the fuel later on. Next image, please. Some people will say, oh, we have to store those things because the the isotopes are radioactive for thousands of years. Let me explain. First of all, when the pellets, which are in 13-foot, approximately long tubes, about a little more than a 1/4 inch in diameter, are stored. Bundles of these stores are inserted in, they're stored underwater within the plant for up to 8 years. And then they are moved outside into these reinforced concrete canisters on site of the plant. We could store all of these canisters on site on one football field, and that would contain all of the US spent fuel for 70 years. And I want you to realize that those workers are not wearing any special protective clothing. A lot of the hysteria about radiation came back from Hermann Muller, who said that all radiation is harmful and cumulative. If you think about it, natural background radiation for the average American walking around in Minnesota is about half of what it is in Denver. And for pilots and their crews who spend time at 20,000 feet, it's higher than that. And yet there's no difference in personal cancers because of background radiation. The fact is, we have mechanisms that control it. Next image, which is a very good book that I recommend, is How the Environmental Community Derailed Environmental Action on Climate Change. And in addition, my book, Unintended Consequences, which Ray can send to you, or you can download from my website for free, has a whole chapter on the opponents of nuclear power and the tactics they have used. Next image, please. I'm looking at all text image, and I'm going to read it in case some of you have trouble with this text. Expanding, safe, highly efficient.
Next image.
Yes? It's all text.
Good. Good.
Expanding, safe, highly efficient, environmentally benign, resource sipping, long-lived, 24/7, carbon-free nuclear power is our single most effective way to slow climate change. Notice I said slow. It will not cancel it, but it will give us time. But instead, we are foolishly expanding less safe, intermittent, grossly inefficient, environment-wrecking, resource-gobbling, short-lived, carbon-dependent wind and solar farms. If we truly care about the environment and the species that depend upon it, including ourselves, we must publicize the science that proves the superior nature of nuclear power. We must become active ambassadors for nuclear power by writing op-eds and offering science-based presentations to colleges, schools, and service clubs now. I do that. I looked at my computer the other day. I have a file just for op-eds, and I see that I have had published more than 120 op-eds supporting nuclear power and criticizing wind and solar in the last 5 years. That's roughly 25 a year. We have the information. Once we have it, use presentations like this to write an op-ed and to back it up with facts and emphasize the facts that all of these images are not from the nuclear industry. They are from independent sources. And the book I recommend, Mine, Unintended Consequences, is 95% from independent engineers and professionals who contribute and were not paid a dime. And that's free. Next image. This is that book. It can be downloaded by clicking on this image at the home page of my website, which is on the left, www.bothsides.com. And that is recently updated. This slide's a little old. I posted an update in December. So you will have the most recent information. About 6 years ago, there was a person called John, oh God, I forget his last name, who was writing a column that was syndicated called Nuke Watch. And it was full of misrepresentation and error. And it appeared in the Duluth Reader and the other readers, and which the public really respects. And he was so wrong, I started to write a series of rebuttals. After the third rebuttal, the publisher got rid of him. And from then on until about 2 years ago, no more of those appeared. And recently, in the Duluth News Tribune, the major newspaper up in northern Minnesota, an op-ed appeared from his, I believe, brother, same last name, airing the same old garbage. Back when his brother John was doing this, I sent those articles of his to former chief clinicist of NASA, Dr. James Hanson, and along with my rebuttals. And he replied, and I kept his email, "Your writing is brilliant and so clear." And he also added, "I might want to borrow some of those things." So I succeeded in shutting him down, but they never die. They come back. Ray, I am pleased to say, wrote a rebuttal to that was very good. And if it has been printed, I did not see it. And when I talk to the editor, whom I know soon, I'm going to ask him if I did something wrong and couldn't find it, or if it never appeared. So hold on and you'll find out. Next image. And this is so true. Cree saying, Only when the last tree has died and the last river has been poisoned and the last fish has been caught will we realize that we cannot eat money. And that's what all of this wind and solar stuff has been about, money. In addition, we need to rethink capitalism because it is all about money. And if we're going to persist with preserving any part of it, we have to examine the carbon footprint of that, because if we don't, we may well be cutting our throats by preserving them despite a negative carbon footprint. Next image, please. This happens to be my grandson about 10 years ago. Our children need your help. Our husbands, all species need your help. Each and every animal on earth has as much right to be here as you and I. I will take questions, and I would ask people to speak rather slowly and distinctly because I have partially corrected minor hearing issues. Thank you.
Ray, you want to take
George, thank you for your talk.
You're welcome.
Very well presented, and I'm glad you were able to make it today.
Yes, thank you. While we're doing questions, if it's possible, would you back up about 3 images from my grandson to the one that shows where people can download the PDF of unintended consequences and just leave that up?
No, we can't do that because then we can't see the other people.
So we can't do that because we need to show the video of people asking questions.
All right, very good.
Okay, anybody have any questions? I see Zem has his hand up.
Yes, hello. Thank you for the great presentation. I generally agree with the premise that you're presenting about nuclear power, but I'm wondering how you would attack the big reputational problems that nuclear power has. You have Chernobyl, you have Fukushima, you have 3 Mile Island. My understanding is that the Diablo Canyon facility that you had a slide of lies on a fault line, a tectonic fault line. So it's not that
Yes.
Nuclear power is unsafe theoretically. I think you're absolutely right. Theoretically, it is the safest form of energy, but human beings have a tendency to screw things up. And I think that creates fear in the populace. So how do you overcome that?
I could easily answer those, and they are answered specifically and to greater detail than I will now. But let's start at the beginning. Chernobyl happened for primarily one reason. There were minor others. Chernobyl was regarded as an unsafe reactor in the international nuclear community for a number of technical reasons, but that isn't what went wrong. What went wrong is, back in those days, Moscow had their finger in everything and would tell people what they were going to do, whether they had any expertise in it or not, or whether Moscow did. They told the operators at Chernobyl to run a safety test of the reactor with the safety systems disabled. Think about that. That's horrible, but they did it. And things went bad so fast, they got out of control. The next thing is, they didn't immediately acknowledge that they had a problem to the world. They waited days until the radiation spread across Europe. By the way, very low level, but very fear-inducing. And so that, if they'd followed the rules, would never happen. And Chernobyl is the only so-called that was also designed to make plutonium for bombs. It was a switch hitter. At the time, it was producing electricity. And there were only the United Nations Committee for the Investigation of Effects of Atomic Radiation, which is unbiased, no dog in the fight, lists 70, I mind you, 70 deaths that were related from radiation from Chernobyl. That is minuscule. People like Helen Caldicott, who did wonderful work to help close down atmospheric nuclear testing, then went nuts about all radiation. And so there was radiation hysteria. There were thousands of unnecessary hysteria prompted abortions in Europe because of pregnant women's fear about having monster children because of that radiation fear. Statistically, there have only been 70, and they all came from Chernobyl. In addition, if you take the people who survived Chernobyl and even new nearby residents, you will find something very interesting, and that's that their solid cancer incidence is lower than distant Russians, because a small increase in background radiation stimulates our own DNA repair mechanism and makes it more efficient. We didn't know all this back in the 20s and 30s and 40s, but we know it now. But we've done a lousy job of making the public aware of it, especially when the public doesn't want to listen. Okay, moving on. We go to 3 Mile Island. That was in, let's say, the teenage years of American nuclear power. They had a stuck valve in the coolant system, and they were slow in interpreting what was happening and misinterpreted it, partly because of not good enough trading and partly because of the instrumentation was confusing. There'd be a green light was okay for some, and for others, maybe it wasn't. That is totally redesigned. Nothing is more controlled in the United States than civilian nuclear power. And that is why we have not had any serious issues. There were no fatalities. There was a lot of hysteria. And in addition, it came right after the blockbuster movie, The China Syndrome, which, the actress, I forget.
Jane
Fonda, right. Made hay with. She's a good actress, but a science ignoramus. And that didn't help. Then most frequently, Fukushima. Fukushima had been generating millions of gigawatts of carbon-free electricity on the Japanese coast for something like at least, I believe, 30 years. And it had a sister plant nearby that had been doing the same thing. And then came a record-setting earthquake that actually moved that island like 7 feet horizontally. The power plant got separated from the grid because power plants are not supposed to rely on their own power. If that fails, there's trouble. So they have connections to the grid and they have backup power. Okay, it separated them from the grid. Now they had to run on backup power, the generators, which worked. Unfortunately, there was a record-setting tsunami that followed, and it overwhelmed the plant. Why did it overwhelm the plant? We now know that when the plant was built, the Japanese government, which is in let us say, friendly contact with all industry because of jobs and money, allowed them to take down a very high natural breakwater to allow construction companies to bring materials ashore. They then rebuilt that breakwater to approximately half to a third of its previous height, which was inadequate. The government told TEPCO, the owners of the plant, that that breakwater was insufficient. They told them rebuild it. TEPCO did not rebuild it, and the government did not make them rebuild it. That failure was not the failure of the power of the process of nuclear power. It was the failure of the politics and the wanting to be cheap that laid the groundwork. In addition, there was another problem, that of design, and this is incredibly stupid. And there's another one. Now, let me mention the other one first. All along this coastline, which is called the Sendai Coast, there are things that look like gravestones. And on those gravestones, and those gravestones are all at a much higher elevation, it says, and these are ancient, it says, do not build below this level. The ancients knew that that coastline was subject, hazardous, at risk from tsunamis. And yet Japan built all kinds of industries and homes right down to the water. And Fukushima was one of them. Okay, that's another problem. Ignore the elders. So we go back to the final mistake, which was now you're on generators within the plant. Where did they place the generators? Foolishly in basements. And of course, what gets flooded first? Basements. That tsunami flooded the basements. There goes the power. They can no longer cool. They shut down, they call it scramming, the reactors. They shut them down. The power output and the heat drops very rapidly, but there is residual radiation within the reactor that keeps on generating immense amounts of heat. And you need water to cool that. And they didn't have it. So you'd see helicopters going back and forth, dumping water on there. And that's a teaspoon. It's ineffective. And because of this hysteria that has been promoted by people who do not do the research and understand that small amounts of radiation are not a risk to the general population. They had this huge evacuation that the professionals now said was 10 times greater than it should have been. Every death that happened at Fukushima, and there were like some 2,000 occurred because of that massive overblown hysteria produced evacuation. People were taken from hospitals, from nursing homes, and laid out on gym floors in distant areas where they got inadequate care. In Japan, suicide is not looked down upon as it is in the United States. So many of the people in the evacuated area decided, I'll never see my house again. I'll never see my business again, and committed suicide. Every death from Fukushima can be attributed to this hysteria prompted by fear of radiation. And as far as Diablo Canyon goes, that comes in the what if category. The plant was designed to withstand it. We what are you going to do? Diablo Canyon supplies, if I remember correctly, about 20%. I don't think of California's carbon-free power, but perhaps the southern half. Anyway, a large portion.
Right, I heard 11% of the California power grid comes from Diablo Canyon.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's what I read somewhere.
Okay. So if my decision were mine, I would keep on using Diablo Canyon. I would do what I can if competent engineers say we need to add this or that, and I would make other safety adaptations in case there were a sufficient earthquake to make damage so that a minimal release of radiation would occur. We have to reframe our thinking. We quit thinking 20th century that there's going to be a technical patch for every time we burn more carbon. There isn't. And as I say, nuclear power isn't the cure-all. It isn't going to fix it. It's going to buy time, and we badly need time. I talked about the oceans. I forgot to mention, that they're a huge heat sink and that they're acidifying and that they absorb all this carbon dioxide. A recent post within the last month pointed out, and this was from an outfit like NOAA, I don't remember the specific one, that the Mediterranean Sea has reached saturation levels of carbon dioxide. That means—
George, I hate to interrupt, but we're running out of time. I'd like to get another couple of quick questions and quick answers, and then we'll have to end.
Okay.
We have a—
that's very good.
We have a lunch here waiting, and time is about up. So any other quick questions for George?
I have just a quick question, I think.
Yeah, I didn't hear about how you thought, if you just quickly summarize how you think that you could get the political situation shifted reasonably quickly.
It's very hard to make a change very quickly because individuals, governments, and companies do not easily admit to a mistake. Having them understand this means that a PDF like this or the PDF of unintended consequences needs to be in the hands of every legislator because they're no different than the people who are on the street regarding physics.
Okay, Matt Courtney.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So after watching this presentation, I'm a little concerned about how much of this information is either incorrect or out of date on your slides. I was doing some Google searching. I was getting very different numbers from what you have posted. And I would have to say, I think you need to go through your slides again and change some of the numbers, particularly stuff around batteries, which I've been following because of, electric cars. There, lots of stuff has changed since in the, past year even, or even several months.
Okay, let's take batteries, for example. First of all, I don't know the source of your links. I do not trust information from companies that profit from selling a product. Batteries have a huge carbon footprint. They have a huge environmental impact when you finally have to recycle them. They are inefficient. You never get out of them what you put into them. They are an excuse to perpetuate inefficient wind and solar. Nuclear doesn't need batteries.
Well, for lithium-ion batteries, they're being used for electric cars, not just for, in fact, not very much for, grid scale energy storage or other methods of doing that. Battery recycling has come a long way because they have to recycle car batteries. And new chemistries are more environmentally friendly.
You're talking lead acid batteries. That's not what we're talking about.
No, I'm not talking about lead acid. I'm talking about lithium ion. Lots of stuff has changed recently.
All right. You're talking about current EV batteries. Yeah, they may have come a long way, but they also have a long way to go. They're a patch. We don't need them. And in addition, federal studies show that unless an EV is powered with electricity generated by carbon-free nuclear power plants, they're losers.
That's actually not true either, but that's not here nor there. But yeah, nuclear energy would be better for charging a car. I'm not going to argue with you on that one.
It would be far better if they use electricity generated by burning carbon. They are.
Okay, let's take just two more quick questions here.
Hi, thank you for your talk. So we talked a lot about the carbon costs of solar and wind production in the entire end-to-end pipeline. But I was wondering, what are the hidden carbon costs of nuclear power? Like maybe building the facilities, building the storage, fuel cell storage containers. So could you talk a bit about that?
That's no problem. There are charts that show that data. They are in the book. And I guess I'd have to say that government statistics show that the cost per kilowatt hour of generating electricity is equivalent to or less than burning coal, which has been the most efficient. And that means that you don't have huge resource needs or huge post-generation needs. I urge everyone to download and read Unintended Consequences because the details are in there. Now, it is impossible to, like occasionally I'll have an image that's 2018 and I won't have the recent one, but almost every time when I go to the recent one, when I get one, it works worse for wind and solar. Those are mature industries. People are saying, oh, well, we'll get them more efficient. Those are patches, they're excuses. We need more people who understand that it's best for safety, it's best for resource use, it is easiest on the environment at the end of the use chain when it comes to recycling or decommissioning, and that nuclear does not even play on an even playing field.
Okay, let's go to Jim and Fran Naylor.
George, that was a very interesting and very complete presentation. I came on a little bit late, and I wonder if you had a publication, if you have published any of this using those many very fine slides and your very good narration points.
Yes, it's called Unintended. It's that image that I showed earlier. I'm sure Ray will supply you, the whole group, with it. It's Unintended Consequences, the lie that killed millions and accelerated climate change. And that lie was told years ago by Hermann Muller.
And also on George's website is the PDF file that has all of the slides in today's presentation. Time to get serious. Okay, I want to thank you, George, again for your presentation. I think it's been very well done, and I will do everything I can to make all your information available to people here.
Good. Thank you, Ray. Keep up the good work.